I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the Electric Grid's Increasingly Vulnerable to Cyber Attacks Energy Brain Trust, really a historic brain trust that is more than 30 years old as we celebrate the wonderful legislative sessions of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the 50th commemoration of the Congressional Black Caucus. I'm Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and I'm delighted that we're looking head on into the importance of the energy grid and as well recognize its vulnerability. We'll be asking the questions: how do we make electricity delivery affordable and reliable? Is it true that developing and investing in the resiliency of the electric grid to promote the delivery of premium service at the lowest cost is something that we should put as our number one priority? Is there a path forward for the United States to become a global leader in combating climate change by greening the grid? How should the United States develop adequate adaptation strategies to mitigate the effects of climate change on human populations? These are the many questions and hope answers that we will have today with our outstanding panelists. And I'm delighted, first of all, to welcome our sponsor. Edison International has a vision to lead the transformation of the electric power industry towards a clean energy future. Through their subsidiaries, the company generates and distributes electric power as well as provide energy services and technologies, including renewable energy. With 135 years of innovation in our history, the company is well positioned and prepared for the work ahead. And we're very delighted to have Brian Barrios, Chief Information Security Officer and Vice President of Cybersecurity and IT Compliance. Brian, good morning.
Hello. It's great to be with everyone today, though be it virtually. It's such an honor to be amongst a fabulous panel. And Congressman Lee, thank you for everything you've done in pulling this together and your leadership through an amazing career. I wanted to say a few things about a topic near and dear to my heart this morning on resiliency of the grid. The nation's grid has been a subject of resiliency attacks over many years, whether that's physical, whether that's from infrastructure, or whether it's from cyber attacks or climate change, another topic we're discussing today. It's important to focus on this as we move forward. If you think about the need of the grid of the future as we move towards more renewable, more clean energy, the grid of the future is adapting rapidly to meet that need of the nation. That's an excellent thing. One thing that is also going to introduce, though, is the need to adapt when it comes to cybersecurity. The grid will drastically change in terms of its connectivity, its resources adapt to it, the need to make decisions fast, bidirectional power flows. The discussion on where the future goes in terms of the grid is a whole different discussion. But I think on how to secure it and how to provide the reliability will be critical, not just for our company, but for the nation. The threats facing our grid are also drastically changing. As many of you know, critical infrastructure in the United States is, anyone estimates, upper 80, 90% operated by private companies. So we have to partner close between public and private, working together to face threats. The situation we find ourselves in today is many of these companies are facing adversaries with effectively unlimited budgets. Other countries attacking our countries using either the grid or other critical infrastructure sectors such as finance, communications. You can think about water. The list goes on. These sectors could be the battlefield and some of the first places some of our adversaries may attack. So we have to think about how do we really bolster that, working together against these kind of entities with significant budgets, great patience coming after us. And then the last thing I wanted to open up with, and I'll leave it there, is how, in that public partnership, when we're working together, how do we ensure that all pieces of the United States government are really coming together with private industry? You think about all the different agencies, whether it's DHS, the Department of Energy, or FBI, many have different authorities and different capabilities. So I think a big focus of what we're going to need to do is ensure everyone's working as one team, and we're leveraging all that to the maximum to ensure that we are effectively defending and providing a reliable grid so that we can continue to provide safe, clean, reliable energy for all of our citizens, all of our customers. Thanks again for having me. I look forward to discussing it further.
Thank you so very much for, one, your commitment to the electric grid, but also the commitment of your company to meet us in the 21st century, and yes, beyond, because that's what this Brain Trust is about. I'm delighted to be joined again by a co-partner, co-moderator, and we've worked together on these crucial issues. Cumbie's Richard Azrahani is a national security lawyer, emerging technology and innovation leader at Deloitte, a banking and digital financial services regulatory and policy expert, and until recently served as a senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Cumbie's has more than 13 years of experience working with senior executives and world leaders on shaping the business, policy, legal, regulatory, and technology dimensions of artificial intelligence, analytics, cognitive, blockchain and DLT, cloud, cryptocurrency, tokenization, cybersecurity, data science, smart cities, fintechs, regtech, energy and utilities, ICT and 5G, digital identity, ICAM, ALML, compliance and risk management, privacy and big data. He's someone you need to have as a friend. He serves on many boards and is the exec sec for the Federal Identity Forum. Having served as Treasury's first representative, he provides leadership on public-private partnerships, strategic planning and innovation. He's been in government and private sector for 19 years, which included working in the United States Senate, and he served in the White House and State Department. We're very grateful to have him. Cumbie's as my co-moderator. We're going to have a lot of fun. Thank you. Welcome again.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you.
Thank you, Congressman.
We are now excited because I said to you that this is a historic energy brain trust. I think we've had almost every energy brain trust with a senior member of the administration of which the brain trust occurred in. And I couldn't be more pleased to be able to have this year the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer M. Granholm, who has made her mark in the 6 months that the president has nominated, and she has served. She is everywhere, but most importantly, she is representative of the innovative leadership of the Biden and Harris administration on the question of energy, energy grid, cybersecurity, and many issues that confront us in the 21st century. Secretary Granholm is leading DOE in helping America achieve President Biden's goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 by advancing cutting-edge clean energy technologies, creating millions of good-paying union clean energy jobs, and building an equitable clean energy future. Secretary Granholm will also oversee DOE's core mission of promoting American leadership in scientific discovery, maintaining the nuclear deterrent, and reducing nuclear danger, and remediating the environmental harms caused by legacy defense programs. But she is a friend to America, a friend to business, a friend to the vulnerable, a friend to communities that are seeking an even playing field as it relates to the energy grid. And certainly I'm going to say she's a friend to those of us who face an antiquated system as we faced in Texas in early 2021 with the frightening and enormous freeze that caused so much damage and billions of dollars of loss in business and the economy. We're delighted that she's a leader, and we're delighted that she will be with us today. Secretary of Energy, Jennifer M. Granholm. Will you welcome, and we're delighted you're with us. Secretary?
Hello, everyone. It is such a pleasure to join you for your 50th annual legislative conference. 50. I want to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee for the invitation to speak to you all today and for her commitment to building this clean energy future, which was so apparent in our roundtable discussion in Texas with clean energy businesses back in May. And let me just say that all of us at the Department of Energy are really encouraged to see the CBC's focus on the state of the nation's electrical grid. I mean, if we think about that, what we've seen just in the past year with the deep freeze in Texas to that sweltering heat that we're seeing and destructive wildfires and the drought, I mean, the climate impacts are posing physical threats to the grid, obviously, and it's also increasing demand for power. And at the same time, as all of that is happening, disruptions from cyber attacks have shown us that our infrastructure is just too vulnerable. And, I don't know if you remember this. I'm reminded of this. The Northeast blackout of 2003, where, the Northeast states were blackened because of the power outage. It was one of the first crises that I dealt with after I took office as governor of Michigan. And it was clear then that the nation's decision to stop investing in the critical infrastructure that we rely on every day, that decision was coming back to bite us. And of course, it would keep biting us harder and harder until we change course. And here we are 20 years later. We still have a 20th century grid that wasn't designed for these 21st century challenges. And the question isn't if it's going to fail. It's really when it's going to fail, how often it's going to fail, who it's going to be hurting the most. Because time and time again, it is low-income communities and overwhelmingly communities of color that get hit first and worst when the power goes out. Folks who already have a high enough energy burden, spending upwards of 30% of their paychecks on power bills. It's true for communities of color. Folks who might not be able to afford heat or air conditioning are spending way too much. And, I've heard through conversations with environmental justice groups in Texas and New York, this fossil energy powered grid is already a raw deal for communities of color. Black and Hispanic Americans inhale 56 and 63% more air pollution than they produce through energy consumption. That is a raw deal. But here's the good news. If we take steps to expand and to modernize the grid, we can move the country closer to our emissions goals. We can protect communities from both fossil fuel pollution and the climate crisis, and we can boost our competitiveness in the global clean energy market all at once. It's a triple win. And that's why this electrical grid is a key part of the president's plan for cutting our emissions in half by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions by 2050. If we do get to 100% clean electricity, if we electrify everything we can, we're going to get most of the way toward decarbonizing our economy. We can make enormous progress toward that 100% clean electricity goal just by deploying the clean energy technologies that we already have. And that starts with bringing thousands more gigawatts of clean energy online in as many places as we can. And that means solar farms out west and solar farms across the south, wind turbines on the plains and off the coasts, even geothermal across the Williston Basin in West Virginia and more. And it also, by the way, means, you know this, it means jobs. And not just in installing and maintaining all this added capacity, but in building the panels and the racks and the turbines and sourcing the raw materials that we need for these domestic supply chains. And that's why the Department of Energy has put $280 million behind solar technologies since we took office. We've set a goal of slashing the cost of solar by 60% by 2030. It's already dropped 90% in the past decade, right? We're going to do it another 60% by 2030. And we launched this new tool. It's called Solar App to speed up local solar permitting, all the while investing in solar deployment in underserved communities. It's why we're teaming up with the Departments of Commerce and the Interior to add 30 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030. It's why we're working to further develop technologies like advanced nuclear and geothermal. With a massive effort to build out our transmission system, we'll be able to move that clean power from wherever it is on the map to anywhere, which of course is registering a rise in demand. So that's why we've opened up $8.25 billion in loans for transmission projects that are going to help us power urban and rural communities alike while increasing resilience across the grid. And in battery storage, and we'll be able to store any excess for wherever the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. So our second energy Earthshot takes aim at slashing the costs of long duration energy storage 90% within the decade. And as we're working to build out the grid, we can take care to build in cutting edge cybersecurity safeguards. And I know many of you are concerned about this. We've rolled out new initiatives within our Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, CSER. We've rolled out these new initiatives to develop safeguards against physical and cyber threats, and we're partnering with the private sector to harden the security of our energy infrastructure as part of that 100-day cybersecurity initiative. We've updated a tool that's designed to help companies evaluate and improve their cybersecurity capabilities. And I'll note that the department's Office of Economic Impact and Diversity is making sure that we do this all in a way that lifts communities up. Guided by my advisor on equity, Shalonda Baker, we are working to deliver clean and affordable energy and new jobs and clean energy businesses for Black communities across this country. We're all in on equity and justice. I'm laser focused on delivering measurable results that are transparent, so that 40% commitment that the president has of investments from the clean energy economy going into, and from the Build Back Better strategy that he has, this American Jobs Plan, we want to make sure it's transparent, that they are directed to communities that should be at the front of the line. So put it all together, and we've taken a ton of steps toward ensuring that cleaner energy goes hand in hand with more resilient energy, more reliable energy, more secure energy, and of course, more equitable and more affordable energy. And so, with the proposals for modernizing and expanding the grid in the Build Back Better agenda, we're going to take a giant leap toward those goals. We're talking the biggest investment in transmission and in the broader electric grid in our nation's history. We're talking a clean electricity standard. We're talking tax credits for clean energy and billions for demonstration projects on advanced nuclear and storage and more. That Build Back Better agenda is going to spark a generational shift for the power sector. And as we make that shift, we can make sure that the lower income communities, communities of color, communities that have borne the biggest burdens of fossil fuels, that they are at the front of the line for the benefits of clean energy. We're going to ease the energy burdens for low income families. We're going to ensure that every community will be able to keep the lights on no matter what the season, and we'll be able to create jobs in every pocket of the country. We're just a little shy of the 20-year anniversary of that Northeast blackout. We didn't make the investments in our grid that we needed then, but as the old proverb goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. Let's not miss the chance to finally bring our grid into the 21st century. Thank you all once again for the invitation to speak. And I hope you have a great, great session.
All right. Well, it's always good when you have such important members of your community and they're so willing to participate, but they are really knowledgeable at a vast number of issues, but they've dealt with them firsthand. Commissioner Rodney Ellis has that universalism. He now serves as a commissioner as one of the largest counties in the nation. He served in the United States in the state Senate. He served in the state Senate for more than 30 years. On June 25th, he became the nominee for the Harris County Commissioners Court. As Commissioner of Harris County, Precinct 1, Ellis has played a critical role on the court by securing misdemeanor bail reform, flood equity guidelines, stronger work protections, and the economic opportunity provisions, funding for indigenous defense and COVID-19 recovery funding, including direct relief for residents, small businesses, emergency rental assistance, shelters for those experiencing homelessness, as well as other innovative programs, including providing computers for low-income students, among other achievements. But I know personally his work in the state energy grid and his knowledge of energy, and I'm delighted to have Commissioner Rodney Ellis. Thank you so very much. Let me also introduce Jesse E. Russell, Chairman, CEO of Inc. Networks. Jesse Russell is an American inventor. He was trained as an electrical engineer at Tennessee State University and Stanford University and worked in the field of wireless communication for over 20 years. He holds patents and continues to invent and innovate in the emerging area of next generation broadband. Mr. Russell was inducted into the U.S. National Academy of Engineering for his contributions to the field of wireless communications. He pioneered the field of digital cellular communications in the 1980s, and he has continued this work and done it dynamically. I'm going to introduce the Commissioner, Mr. Stark, as well at this time, recognizing his schedule. And I am delighted to have Commissioner Jeffrey Starks, who believes that communications technology has the potential to be one of the most powerful forces on earth for promoting equality, opportunity. To unlock that potential, however, all Americans must have access, from combating internet inequality to advocating for diversity in employment, entrepreneurship, and media ownership. Because of high quality broadband is essential to participating in our economy and society, Commissioner Starks has been a champion for the millions of Americans who lack access to or cannot afford a home internet connection. As a native Kansan, he understands the communications needs of rural America. He has consistently advocated for broadband deployment that helps rural communities tap into economic and educational opportunities that may not be close to home, which both encourages young people to stay and attracts new residents and employers. We're going to start with Commissioner Ellis, Mr. Russell, and Commissioner Stark, and then we will pick up and introduce our other outstanding panelists. So would you begin, Commissioner Ellis?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and we're so lucky to have you representing us in the United States Congress. I'm glad to be here for the traditional annual legislative conference of the Black Caucus. So good to see my chair of the Port Authority, Rick Campos, and Colette, and Commissioner, and all of you. I'm glad to be here. Texas is obviously a big state, and Harris County is about 5 million people. That means if we were a separate state in Harris County, we'd be about the 25th or 26th largest state in the country. Very diverse population. As you mentioned, Congresswoman, I left the state Senate after a long career there, about 26, 27 years. I joined Harris County Commissioners Court, 5-person governing board. Our chair is Judge Lena Hidalgo. And I came in 2017, and as Chairman Campos knows, we've had some very interesting weather events since I've been here. First one we'll start with would be Harvey, which was clearly a Texas-sized storm. I think if you Google it, you'll see that it's probably considered the worst natural disaster we've had in the history of this country. Just the loss was just phenomenal across our region. The amount of rainfall that came down was something that no one would have anticipated. And then you go from having to deal with that. And we're so grateful to our federal partners for the support that we got. We're still dealing with it in terms of people who are still not back in their homes. Then we had a Texas-sized freeze, a bitter chill that swamped through Texas and across the nation. Is another reason why we needed federal support again. All of us in Texas now, regardless if that was a time when some people were afraid to say climate change, it's here. And extreme weather seems to be the new normal for us, particularly after that historic cold outbreak that led to the coldest air in decades across the country, reaching all the way to the Rio Grande and bringing record amounts of snow and ice to the deep south. I think maybe 154 million people, roughly half the population of the country, were in sub-freezing temperatures, but you normally wouldn't think about that in Texas, of all places. Dallas dipped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature in that city since '89. Austin and San Antonio, both in Texas, had single-digit temperature for the first time since '89. Corpus Christi dipped down to 17 degrees. The coldest has been there as well. You know, Texas is unique. We have our own grid, obviously. There used to be a time we'd brag about that, but when the grid failed, we couldn't go to our partners with the other grids in the country and ask for help because we were not connected. Obviously, deregulation was a big issue in Texas, but nobody intended by having deregulation to simply let the industry control itself with no controls. And that we're finding was a big mistake now. On the city level, the city of Houston has come up with a very vibrant resiliency plan to deal with climate change, with the things they can do on a local level. Very few counties around the country have done it. Counties in Texas don't have ordinance making power. We only have the power that the state government gives us. But we have passed the plan, and we are designating a new resiliency officer. We're doing a nationwide search. Hopefully the person is already in Texas, particularly if we want them to come in at a time of year when it's hot. You know, our weather is only held, used to be for 3 months. Maybe now it's about 4.5 months. But the rest of the year, absent a 100-year freeze, is pretty much like San Diego weather the rest of the year in Texas. But we're going to do as much as we can on the local level. We hope that our federal partners will offer some incentives. It's exciting that we have joined the Paris Accord again. I hope that during my tenure in county government, we don't just give up on the ability to impact the ravages of climate change and simply go into a mode in which we are adapting to these severe weather changes. I hope that there's still time and we're willing to act. I think the federal government, to a great extent, will have to lead us. But whatever we can do on the local level, we're going to do it. We're a great partner with the city of Houston to do as much as we can in a massive, very diverse area. So, Congresswoman, thank you for your leadership. I'm glad to be a part of this panel. And anytime you call on me, I'm willing to be here. I'm going to be around for maybe about another 15 minutes before I have to run to another appointment. But thank you for having such a distinguished group of panelists who I know will solve this problem so we don't all end up in the mode in which we're just adapting to these severe weather changes. So thank you.
Commissioner Ellis, thank you so very much for your leadership. And more importantly, thank you for understanding that we must work together with local, state, and federal government, particularly those elected officials that are closest to the people. We're glad that you're open in the commission and the counties open to innovation because you're going to have to be on the front lines for energy and energy grids and the ability to innovate. So thank you for that. I'm delighted now. Mr. Russell, welcome. We're delighted to have you.
This is Jesse Russell from Inc. Communication Solutions. First, thanks to Congresswoman Jackson Lee for the invitation to participate on this panel, along with other distinguished panelists, to discuss such a critical topic as the increasing vulnerability of cyber attacks on our critical energy and communications infrastructure. Our company, Inc. Communication Solutions, has been engaged with the federal government on 5G-related critical infrastructure technology innovations, including cybersecurity, in the following areas: enterprise renewable energy solutions to support energy resiliency for public and private commercial office buildings, as well as protection of critical energy infrastructure within these smart buildings and campuses from cyber attacks. Secondly, we have also focused on enterprise cellular communications network solutions with embedded cybersecurity protection for one of the most challenging future cybersecurity threats, which is smart mobile devices entering public and private commercial office space with the potential of providing cyber threats into that infrastructure, as well as extracting data that is unauthorized from the infrastructure. Finally, we have also been working on the development of enterprise data protection technology platforms to support the emergence of 5G network generation energy management and control systems, next generation management and control systems for enterprise point of use renewable energy solutions, and smart information and communications infrastructure for large corporate enterprise buildings and campuses based on the utilization of 5G new radio standards technology since 2010 as a member of the FCC Technology Advisory Council. Much of our work has been based on the March 2015 executive order by the Obama administration on planning for federal sustainability in the next decade. Our company has been working with various federal agencies proposing new 4G and 5G technology platforms to modernize federal government's critical infrastructure, such as renewable local generated energy solutions, multi-cloud enterprise service architectures, cybersecurity zero trust architectures, and 5GE enterprise converged energy and communication software-defined networks. Many of these new 5GE energy and communications technology platforms are being developed to support the implementation of next generation energy management and control systems with embedded cybersecurity protection and data security protection capabilities within federal as well as commercial building environments. The new Energy Act of 2020 has been key in providing some of the new capabilities, as well as additional flexibility that has helped tremendously in the development work that we have been doing with these new technology platforms. The 5GE enterprise energy and communication solutions that we've been working on utilize an embedded cybersecurity infrastructure protection technique, as well as the development of new security techniques to protect federal government enterprise data as its primary priority. And this protection is to protect the data from unauthorized access or unauthorized use. During the November 20th, 2014 testimony before the House Select Intelligence Committee on the subject of cybersecurity threats, the way forward, the following was stated by Admiral Mike Rogers, the commander of the United States Cyber Command. The energy sector continues to bear the brunt of our country's cyber attacks because hackers recognize that the energy sector is our country's Achilles heel. It has been this insight that has focused the work of our company on developing new 5G enterprise and communications technology platforms with embedded cybersecurity protection, data security protection capabilities for new buildings and next generation energy management and control systems that could potentially mitigate the weaponization of critical energy infrastructure and cybersecurity vulnerabilities within the enterprise. Our company strongly believes that currently leveraging the United States natural gas leadership in combination with distributed enterprise microgrid networks utilizing microturbine energy technology, which was funded by the U.S. taxpayers, can potentially be a major greenfield of opportunities for renewable new energy technology applications within the public and private office building environment, as well as potential applications within federal assisted housing complexes. Microturbine energy efficiency is significantly higher than typical local generation or distribution methods as a result of the utilization of the waste heat within these private enterprise locations, with potentially 90% reduction in greenhouse gases. The Obama administration was the first to recognize this as a renewable energy technology that can be immediately implemented while serving as a complementary, cost-effective bridge to a spectrum of emerging green alternatives, such as, for an example, hydrogen fuel cells. Much of the new technology development to address the vulnerability of cyber attacks that we have been working on is taking pretty much the same approach that was taken with the development of technology platforms in the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. We typically develop technology platforms that are designed around a concept we refer to as iNetwork. These platforms are then integrated together to form a unique solution for any given building environment with specified policy management techniques that determine how the platforms are being used. There are 4 basic platforms that we tend to recommend as we interact with various members of the federal government. The first one is 5GE software-defined networks. These are cellular-based software-defined networks that support both wired and wireless endpoint termination, But more important than that, they also allow and protect from devices roaming into the private network environment by providing something we refer to as cybersecurity certification techniques. This is on top of what is typically done, such as registering devices on the network and giving authorization for use of those devices. We now will be moving toward making sure that every single device that interacts on the network that has the potential to extract data from the network must go in real time through a cybersecurity certification process. The second type of technology platform that we've been working on is 5GE Local Renewable Energy System, which is primarily focused on, from a communications point of view, providing cybersecurity protection for your energy operations technology that might exist within the building, and preventing any potential cyber attacks on that microgrid network that's within the building. The third platform is what we refer to as the cybersecurity management technology platform, which is primarily focused on the management and movement of smartphones within the enterprise environment, such that we can ensure that those devices cannot extract data from the enterprise network without the proper authorization or oversight in real time electronically on the network. And then the final one that we have been working on for the last several years is something we refer to as 5GE virtual data processing centers that are designed to go within the building to create a multi-cloud network environment within the building for rapid shared service development as well as custom service development. The benefit of these technology platforms to enterprise buildings, whether they be federal buildings or commercial office buildings, is that you can leverage these technology platforms to create unique solution that is targeted for a particular federal agency building. As an example, the Department of Education would be treated differently than the Department of Treasury, different than the Department of Agriculture. So at this point, we'd be delighted to engage in the remaining conversations or discussions within the panel and be glad to answer questions about any of the things that I've covered. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so very much. But let me yield now to Commissioner Stark of the Federal Communications Commission, one of the singularly crucial components to technology, cybersecurity, and even energy. Commissioner Stark, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Congresswoman Jackson Lee. Thank you to the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for inviting me, of course, to join this distinguished panel. This is a timely discussion, as is our need for secure, resilient energy grids. It's never been greater. Each year brings the impact of climate change into clearer focus as we cope with those record highs and low temperatures, storms of greater ferocity and scope, rapidly depleting natural resources. And at the same time, we're dealing, of course, with, as you mentioned, the greatest public health crisis in a century, forcing many families to stay home for work, for schooling, connecting with their community. But even as our reliance on the energy grid has increased, we face new challenges. As Secretary Granholm recently warned, cyber criminals and adversary states are seeking to hack into America's energy sector. And so in addition to those unpredictable weather patterns generated by climate change, we have increased demand and upended historical approaches towards energy resource management. And these extreme weather events are particularly devastating for Black people and other communities of color, which are concentrated in areas that are frequently hardest hit by extreme weather, natural disasters, and those power outages. And so this, as you just heard from the Congresswoman and the Commissioner, these issues will take a whole of nation response because of the interrelationships between the energy sector and the telecommunications sector. The FCC does have a critical role to play. I've seen this up close when I visited Puerto Rico in late 2019 and saw public, industry, government showing how those natural disasters had affected the Commonwealth's communication networks. And then after those earthquakes in 2020, the majority of the wireless service outages were also due to power loss. And I know Congresswoman Jackson Lee Mayor Turner know these issues very well. Hurricane Harvey had a similar impact down there in Houston. And given the importance of these issues, the FCC needs to play its role. Like the energy sector, telecom networks face serious cyber threats from criminals as well, as I mentioned. And in the last year, ransomware hackers have successfully penetrated the security of major telecom providers. And so I appreciate the president's national security memorandum calling for broad government and industry cybersecurity initiatives across those critical infrastructure sectors. So like our colleagues in the Department of Energy and DHS, the FCC is working aggressively to counter those cyber threats, working with our federal partners, including CISA, who I know we'll hear from here later today. And most recently, we proposed to revoke the authority to import, market, sell equipment from vendors that could produce insecurities. And so the energy sector needs to know that our telecom networks are secure and resilient. With such assurances, the energy sector can take full advantage of 5G and the next generation in wireless service. 5G will not only be faster than its predecessor, but will allow expanded communications between devices. 4G allowed communications between up to 4,000 devices per square kilometer. 5G will allow up to 1 million devices in that same area. And so energy companies, along with many in the critical infrastructure sectors, will be able to use this to further those massive networks of sensors generating information for data and action. And smart meters are going to be a great example of the energy sector in advancing. Energy companies will be able to use those wireless technologies to increase efficiency and their safety. It's going to be important that I see all across America, energy and telecom companies partnering with cities to produce those smart cities, which can use monitoring systems to reduce pollution, energy consumption. And of course, Houston is a leader in this area. And I look forward to those 5G benefits as well to take us all to the next level. And so to close here, I see deep parallels between the energy sector and the telecommunications sector. Both face serious challenges, but the future also holds tremendous promise. And so eager to have that discussion here today as we look forward to fulfilling that promise. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we recognize your busy schedule, and therefore we are very pleased to have you here and hope that we will move quickly to our questioning as we begin to welcome our other panelists. So let me introduce the chairman of the Houston Port Board, and a man that has, some would say, needs no introduction, but he is renowned in our community. Rick Campos is the chairman of the Port Commission of the Port of Houston Authority, who was appointed to the position in January 2019 by the city of Houston and Harris County Court and was sworn in on February 7th. In his position as chairman of Port, he also serves as chairman of the Board of Pilot Commissioners of Harris County Port, which oversees ship pilot matters. Mr. Campos is chairman of the board and chief executive officer of the Camden Property Trust and has served in this capacity since 1993. He joined a private Houston real estate company after graduating from Oregon State University in 1976, co-founded the Camden's predecessor company in 1982, serves on the board of directors of several organizations that focus on economic development and business outlook and future growth. He's always been part of the future of our great city, certainly part of the Greater Houston Partnership. He's been past chairman of the Houston First. And so he's worked in many areas where he sees the economy, communities, energy, and the power of coming together, having to be part of his agenda. So I welcome you, Chairman Campos. Delighted to have you here. My co-moderator will now introduce our other wonderful panelists, and then we will start with Rick Campos and our other panelists.
So we're also honored to have with us today Dr. David Muskington. Dr. Muskington serves as the Executive Assistant Director for the Infrastructure Security Division at the Department of Homeland Security's CISA, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, as of February 2021. As the Executive Assistant Director, he helps lead CISA's efforts to secure our nation's critical infrastructure in coordination with government and the private sector. His priorities include, vulnerability and risk assessments, securing soft targets and crowded places, training exercises, and securing high-risk chemical facilities. I'm also honored to introduce my good friend and one of the smartest people I know, especially in the energy space, Miss Colette, the Honorable Colette Honorable. I love saying that. Colette serves as a partner of Reed Smith since July of 2017. She was also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and previously served as a commissioner of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. We also have with us today Joseph Aban. He is one of the founders of Versa Integrated Solutions and is also their president. He works closely with the Versa CEO and the executive team to collectively provide strategic oversight and industry-leading best practices for the organization. And with that, I believe we've introduced the remaining panelists, Congresswoman, so I think we can go to Mr. Campos' remarks.
I'd like to thank Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for hosting this important topic. Thank you so much for all you do every day, Congresswoman. I appreciate that. Just a little background. Port Houston is the non-federal sponsor and advocate and strategic leader for the Houston Ship Channel. There are more than 200 private and public terminals along the Houston Ship Channel. Port Houston manages 8 of the public terminals, which include 2 container facilities handling 75% of the containers in the Gulf region. And we know that 80% of all consumer goods come in containers. The Houston Ship Channel generates $802 billion of economic value annually and supports 3.2 million jobs. A stable and reliable energy grid is absolutely critical to maintaining the flow of goods and energy to consumers. We're confident in the security measures that we have in place at Port Houston, but as we know, no one is 100% secure in this environment. Port Houston is a leader in sustainability in our region. We recently hosted 3 sustainability task force working groups that looked at specific projects that Port Houston could invest in, lead, partner, or support. We have moved Port Houston to 100% renewable energy usage, and have recently started replacing our yard RTGs. These are the big rubber-tired gantry machines that move boxes around and around the yard, and we've replaced the most recent ones with hybrid engines. We all need to be involved in this discussion, from national, state, and local governments, along with the private sector, to work together to ensure that these important issues are addressed. We clearly need more collaboration and funding for the security areas, and also for the grid enhancement, and making sure that we have a reliable grid. Because at the end of the day, without energy and without computers and technology, we can't bring consumer goods to market or have energy flow through the channel, which is really, really important. So I appreciate being a part of this discussion with the group today, and look forward to more and really some viable solutions to this debate, rather than just talking about it. So thank you.
Thank you so very much. Let me quickly, Commissioner Starks?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, I'm trying to keep my commitment. And also thank you for your leadership. So let me pose a question to you. Your commitment to broadband, we're not there yet. 5G may turn into 6G and 7G. We may be behind the times even now, but try to wrap a response in the importance of communications, broadband, and the whole landscape of where America is going, which is technology, the electric grid, for example. You might be able to answer that in response to the workforce that needs to ensure the electric grid works. They will be using technology, but the electric grid working is communications. So tie all of that into the cruciality of communications, if you would, and technology.
Thank you for the opportunity. And again, truly thank you for the panel. Energy and communications are interdependent. The communication sector relies on the energy sector to power its operations. The energy sector relies on communications to manage, maintain its infrastructure. And so that means that a threat to one sector inevitably can affect the other one. And so we see that with power outages, whether that's due to natural disasters, cyber attacks, ice storms, as we've heard about from a number of folks, cyber criminals. And so again, that's why, as I mentioned, that we need a whole of government. But from the big to the small, energy companies rely, as I said, heavily on communications in the communication sector. They operate communication networks to monitor their operations, particularly for outages that have to be reported. And these networks have to meet that high reliability standards. Employees for these companies obviously also communicate with each other through wireless devices. And then on the consumer side, to the small, as you heard Mr. Russell talking about, smartphone users are going to be part of that future. Smartphone users are already being able to better track and manage their energy usage, control energy usage even from afar. And then I'll briefly kind of touch on the future. And that is, as I mentioned, smart meters, smart cities. Those are going to be able to track energy outages, communicate with computers. Efforts to make a more digital and distributed power grid will make it more resilient. And I encourage all the companies, all of the folks, that public-private partnership that we heard about, experimenting here because it is going to be part of our shared future and what is going to make us all safer and our world more clean as well.
Thank you so very much. I will remember that one sentence that both the communications and energy are interrelated. I might throw in Dr. King, who said there's a mutuality of our causes and our issues. And I think we have to confront them both. And we see that we're suffering in both. And we want to be constructive. Even this dialogue, I believe, is constructive as we look to how each of us will go to our spheres of influence and make a difference. So, Commissioner, thank you so very much for your presence here today. And we will be incorporating and collaborating. I think we are now prepared to hear from Mr. Aban. Thank you so very much for your presence here.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, for your leadership. We had a discussion last year where we talked about Power Africa. So we're very privileged to be back here again to talk about the power grid here in the United States and how we all can contribute from this panel to enhance the environment. Various Integrated Solutions, we come from the IT infrastructure and solutions delivery. We support DoD, DHS, and the civilian environment. And what we've seen and how it applies to power is they're traditional environments, there's a traditional operating system. So in the power grid, from the years past, there's the traditional operating systems. And today, with the demand for adding and integrating, like you mentioned, the interoperability of traditional IT systems like office systems, mobility applications, what we are doing is trying to provide the same security, because the cybersecurity world and the hackers are very good at hacking the traditional IT infrastructure system. So as we tie these two systems together, the traditional power grid infrastructure, just like in the civilian world where we do work for the FDA, where they have data centers that have mainframes that are about 30 years old. Once we tie traditional IT infrastructure two systems together, it becomes very easy for hackers and cybersecurity to find their way through that environment. So what we have done as a company is come up with different technologies that allows us to build a gateway, like Jesse mentioned before, between the traditional operating technologies that, for example, the power systems have, and separate that gateway from the IT traditional systems that we all use, our mobility environment, our Office 365, using standard environments that we are aware of. So our company, what we are doing is, end users want planning, forecasting, billing. I just came from Ghana this morning, and 2 days ago, one company just went on their iPhone and went on the app and added 1,000 units to their power for the office when they realized the usage was going down. So that means it's becoming very easy to provide interoperability between the two systems. So I think for this panel, as we move forward and we understand more and more what the traditional environment looks like and the impact of integrating today's technology to the traditional technologies, that's where we feel as a company, if we can enhance it and make the two environments become seamless, then the interoperability and the interdependency becomes very efficient. So thank you for inviting us to the panel, and I'll look forward to fielding some more questions and help us evolve. So thank you.
We're very glad to have you back, and thank you for that. And Africa is a huge component, current day component, and future component. So we're delighted. Mr. Campos, would you call upon our next very outstanding speaker, the Honorable? The Honorable
Colette Honorable.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and my dear friend Campos, and to all of you. It's a delight to be back with the Congresswoman's Brain Trust. We can always count on you, Congresswoman, to bring the very best brain trust, focus on the challenging and cutting edge issues in our sector, particularly in the energy sector. And so I'm grateful to you. Reed Smith has continued to be a very proud supporter of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and it's a delight for us to participate in this ALC. I've really enjoyed hearing the perspectives of the other panelists, and I want to just offer a few comments grounded in my former role as commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and now my current role as an independent director for Southern Company, and how that has really shaped my understanding and work in this sector as we collectively work to protect our grid and critical infrastructure. Certainly, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is charged by Congress pursuant to the Federal Power Act, Section 215 in particular, with oversight of the electric grid. And that's a huge responsibility. It's more than just transmission lines. It encompasses generation facilities of all types, not yet gas pipelines or oil pipelines. And that journey is still playing out, and one that really requires a lot of focus in light of the recent Colonial pipeline incident in May. But for its part, FERC has developed and maintained mandatory reliability standards, which are first in class and the best around the globe, second to none. And many countries around the world look to the US for our framework and our structure, which has served us well. The threats continue, so our work in that area is never done. Our need to collaborate as never before with stronger public-private partnerships is increasingly important as the threats are increasingly growing. I know from my time at FERC and sitting in SCIF rooms, learning about the threat vectors, that the threats are real and they are pervasive and they are continuing and becoming much more sophisticated than they ever have. During my time as president of the National Association of Public Utility Commissioners, Regulatory Utility Commissioners, I participated in the Electric Subsector Coordinating Council. This is a very strong example of the strength of public-private partnerships. It, in fact, is comprised of a number of key federal government entities, a number of them, including the Department of Homeland Security, DOE, the Executive Office of the White House, and many others, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, along with key leaders in the electric sector and regulatory bodies and stakeholder groups in the industry. This is a critical time for us to be focused on ways to work better together. I appreciated the FCC commissioner's comments about this symbiotic relationship, is the way that I refer to it, between the electric and telecommunications sectors. We need to find ways to enable and support that work better. I'll get to that in a moment. By the way, Tom Fanning, who's Southern Company CEO, is co-chair of the ESCC, and its work is really focused on driving strategic areas of focus to protect the grid, protect critical infrastructure, both in the physical sense and against cyber attacks. So that work is critically important. And that that council was formed shortly after Superstorm Sandy. And I think that's when we realized we could do a much better job in the ways in which these sectors communicate and work together. We need better coordination and communication. This work now has continued. Congress has, in fact, stood up the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, in fact, in 2019 through the passage of legislation. And this too is a critical effort. It's bicameral, it's bipartisan. Tom Fanning happens to be a commissioner there too. So in my current work with Southern Company, I'm well steeped in what's happening in the sector. It's charged with developing a strategic framework for fending off significant cyber threats. So we have a number of ways in which this work is continuing. I'm really pleased to learn of President Biden's work in this area. I know that Dr. Muskington will probably reference it in his remarks. We need all hands on deck. I want to get back to a point that the Commissioner Stark's referenced by saying that we need to enable technology in new and different ways. I'm certainly aware of the FCC's approval to allow the leasing of the almost exclusive use of the 900 megahertz broadband spectrum to support utility operations and to really bolster reliability and resilience efforts. Anterix is one company that's doing this today. So it's a great example of how we are leveraging every tool that we have. We need to dig deeper, work harder, work smarter, work better together in order to carry out this important work. Now, I want to touch on the fact that we certainly do need to focus on incorporating mandatory reliability standards in the oil and gas sector. I know there are a number of folks in industry that support it so that we are as strong as we can possibly be. We're only as strong as that weakest link. And so I think it's a great opportunity for us to really look at what we can do better and to fortify this important work. So with that, I will yield. Oh, I should have mentioned also in my time at Southern Company, I am on the committee for business security and resiliency. And so there we are really focused on identifying, managing, assessing, and addressing threats to the critical infrastructure within the company. And I urge other entities to incorporate this work. I love Brian's remarks at the top of the session, Congresswoman, when he spoke about the importance of ensuring reliability, yes, and resilience of the grid. Affordability is critically important, reliability. But what good are those two objectives if our grid is not safe and if it's not secure? So we have to really balance and be more nimble than we ever have. And so it's a delight today to participate and offer a few thoughts in your brain trust. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so very much. Reliability, resilience, safe and secure. And I'm going to say modern, updated, current. And many of you know we are working hard on a new, unique investment in America's infrastructure. I'll use the terminology building back because all across America, our constituents, rural and urban, need to be living in a nation that has a sophisticated energy grid and communication system. And I think we are combining that very well today. I will continue to use those words: resilience, reliability, safe and secure, modern and updated is very important. And so it's my pleasure to yield to Mr. Muskington, Executive Assistant Director for the Information Security Division of the Department of Homeland Security, a committee of which I've served on since the heinous tragedy and terrorist act of 9/11. We are grateful that the country still stands, and even in the spite of the act of January 6th, this democracy still stands, and the Department of Homeland Security stands in the gap for protecting that democracy.
Thank you, Congressman Jackson Lee. It's a pleasure to participate today, and send the regards of our new director, Jen Easterly, who had an unfortunate conflict. difficult to follow my esteemed panelists here in terms of communicating anything brand new or different. So what I'll try and do is talk about what CISA brings to the fight, brings to the battle to ensure resilience and risk management to the grid. Obviously, the electricity grid in its different forms is foundational to most of the other critical infrastructures we have in the United States. I think it's fair to say that absent reliability and availability of the grid, most other things in terms of industrial production and the welfare of the American people are impeded significantly. So what does CISA bring to the table? CISA fundamentally is a risk advisor for critical infrastructure, a partner to remediate risk to the economy, to national security, and to critical infrastructure availability, and to data protection and confidentiality. So to that end, we use public-private partnerships to collaborate with the private sector, which obviously owns most of our critical infrastructures, to achieve the best levels of risk management and resilience possible. The challenges there are unprecedented complexity of the risk environment itself, which has a couple of components. First, obviously, with climate change and other renewable and hybrid forms of energy, sources of energy, stresses on the grid are greater than they've ever been. So there's an engineering and risk management challenge to make sure that load and generation stay balanced. So the grid has that task. Second, I think there is the challenge of the internet and the internet connectivity, interconnection of grid components, not just because we have renewables and other non-traditional generation sources, but because the internet itself and the protocols that allow it to operate are vulnerable, and they are vulnerable to exploitation by a spectrum of actors, from criminals to nation states, that show an interest in seeking to disrupt or assure the capability to disrupt our grid for their own purposes. And that's where CISA sits at the intersection of challenges for grid and industry safety and stability, and seeking to thwart the attempts to exploit vulnerabilities by adversaries, be they nation state or criminal. Now, how do we go about doing that? We go about doing that by fostering best practice adoption and continuous assessment of the grid to make sure that the best possible safety and security practices are both communicated to energy companies, to grid operators, and so that their users as well adopt best and safe security practices for connected equipment. That means through exercises that we hold, through exercises that we participate in. For example, we participate in GridX. We hold a Cyberstorm exercise next year. We'll hold Cyberstorm 8, which will show a complex set of disruptions, but obviously a grid disruption and grid instabilities are at the heart of most interesting scenarios in cybersecurity for critical infrastructure, and it'll be a part of that one as well. In order to deal with challenges that scale to the nation, it's important that a trust basis of collaboration be maintained between the U.S. government, CISA as a part of that federal interagency, and the critical infrastructure owner-operators of the electricity grid infrastructure and other connected infrastructures, who have the most timely, the most up-to-date awareness of risk experience, the activities that threat actors try and undertake inside the grid that we may only find out about if we have a trust relationship with critical infrastructures that allows us to know soon so that we can collaborate on their remediation. Examples of non-grid but interconnected infrastructure that show how this model can work were provided by the Colonial Pipelines example recently, by JBS Foods recently, and by the collaboration that CISA had with interagency partners in the private sector during the MS Exchange server situations a few months ago. In each of those examples, incident management was undertaken in collaboration with the private sector, with private threat information providers, and with state and local governments, which all had a piece of the perspective on the realities of infrastructure disruption. What that means is that CISA is one of many agencies that contribute personnel, technology and insight from our experience to making sure that recovery and resilience are maximized as soon as possible, and that proactive action, prevention being cheaper than the cure, proactive action on risk mitigation and information sharing can take place in advance of the fight, in advance of incidents, to mitigate many of the risks before they actually take form. That's what CISA tries to do. It tries to raise the ambient level of risk management capability in industry, with collaboration with the electricity sector, one of the more highly advanced sectors in terms of risk management in this area. We think the nation's going to do better in the future. To use a phrase, build back better in the infrastructure program and in our program of outreach on cybersecurity. We're optimists. We think that applying the best efforts, the best minds that America has to the problem gives us new possibilities, and that's what we expect and have as an aspiration going forward. Just a word on the National Security Memorandum that was issued late in July that talks about industrial control systems and talks about performance goals. The notion here is, in order to have improvement, we have to show improvement. That means having metrics and measurably better performance on cybersecurity best practices against an agile threat environment where the threat actor is constantly trying to find an exploitable risk or vulnerability that they can use for their purposes. So what that means is that we need to know what's happening in grid segments, in critical infrastructure, and of course, the private sector knows more about the operational risk environment than government does, so that collaborative, trust-based relationship is doubly important. So that National Security Memorandum builds on President Biden's earlier leadership in taking a very serious, hard look at cybersecurity risk conditions and doing what we can to organize ourselves better. For all, CISA is a new agency. We have a new National Cyber Director. We have leadership of Deputy National Security Advisor Neuberger at the White House, all rowing in the same direction to try and make sure that risks that are discovered are mitigated as soon as possible with the lowest burden on industry and the American people that we can manage. Keep taking on board the fact that strategic risk management may mean that in the short run, things may not be improving as quickly as some of us might want, but in the long run, coordination and information sharing and partnership will build capacity so that we can all do better. I was going to say something about national critical functions, but I'll save that for Q&A if people have them. The point being that we have a strategic approach to risk management. Risk management in the electric grid is a key element of that comprehensive approach, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you for those remarks. I would now like to turn it over to Congresswoman Jackson Lee, who will offer closing remarks to our discussion.
Let me thank you all so very much, and thank the audience, and thank my co-moderator as well for his leadership, and to ensure that you realize that when we continue the work of the Energy Brain Trust, we are placing squarely on the agenda of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and the Congressional Black Caucus the crucial life issues of America. We know too well in Texas, because of the energy grid crisis at the beginning of 2021, loss of life was huge, and loss of dollars was likewise. The loss of life hurt us dearly, and certainly the disruption of families and the questioning of why did we have a collapse of a 21st century nation's energy grid. One of the reasons, of course, in Texas could attribute to the way that grid was constructed. But the reason for this Energy Brain Trust is to focus on going forward as we in Texas look backwards, to be able to go forward, to recognize the errors and to recognize the corrective measures. The world has changed with the introduction of personal computing and the embedding of increasing smaller computing technology in everyday devices and applications that make life easier, but introduces vulnerabilities that have never been seen before. The energy grid obviously dealt with energy resources, but yes, computers and technology were very much a part of it. The greater the scope of technological advances, the greater dependence on the proper functioning of computing technology for services small and complex. The dependency of a time when there is a skills gap between the number of cybersecurity professionals and the jobs in those skills is enormous. According to the 2020 cybersecurity workforce, the industry is currently in need of about 3 million qualified cybersecurity workers, and 64% of the cybersecurity professionals surveyed say their organization is impacted by the cybersecurity skills shortage. So as we begin our questions, which will begin with my co-moderator, we must focus on that skills gap, the strength of U.S. cybersecurity and energy workforce, and climate reform is paramount to our national security and economic stability. But there are over 300,000 unfilled positions in the U.S. On December 13, 2020, the SolarWinds attack occurred. And on May 7, 2021, the ransomware attack against the Colonial pipeline took place. However, this was not the first sign of trouble. Mind you, those are two energy generating entities, SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline, two diverse energy entities, and they are intertwined with our cyber and our technological system. In 2017, the shipping conglomerate Maersk was hit by a massive ransomware cyber attack called NotPetya that crippled the company's shipping operations globally and infected automated systems at ports around the globe as a computer infection migrated from Maersk's system into port operations, including facilities within the United States. In 2018, Maersk's chair, Jim Hagerman Snob, detailed the awful toll of the ransomware system or epidemic by describing the depth of the attack that required the reinstallation of 4,000 new servers, 45,000 new PCs, 2,500 applications. Just imagine that on a continuous basis in the essential services of America: communications, energy, healthcare. The chair said this complete overhaul of IT hardware company-wide was done in over 10 days. The massive effort was unheard of at the time and is even more difficult to imagine in light of the attack against Colonial Pipeline earlier this year. That same year in 2017, Hurricane Harvey took aim at Texas coast, left a destructive pathway along the coast of Texas and Louisiana, resulting in tens of thousands left homeless or with severely damaged home due to record-breaking flooding. You can be assured that in the mix was the grid, because in a hurricane, all of those elements of essential life shut down. Sometime in 2019, as I said earlier, something extraordinary happened at the Port of Houston. A huge electrical transformer weighing between 250 and 500 tons, which was destined for the Washington Area Power Administration's Alt Colorado substation, was seized by the Department of Energy and the Department of Homeland Security. The transformer was taken to the Sandia National Laboratory in Albuquerque, and nothing has been heard of it since. It would have been a companion to one already in service on the WAPA system. It is believed that the transformer was grabbed because of the fears of backdoor electronics, which could be activated, and which were timed by its Chinese manufacturer to change the operation and affect the electric grid. These are none less serious issues. These are no fault of the receiver and transportation entity, which of course would have been the port. These are directly related to the issues that we're talking about today. On May 1st, 2020, the Executive Order 13920 directed utilities not to purchase bulk power systems from adversaries. It is believed this order was a result of what was found in a WAPA transformer at the Alt substation outside Denver in the summer of 2019. This extraordinary event would have gone unnoticed, but by the public, if it weren't for a single article in the May 27th edition of the Wall Street Journal. The safety and reliability of the Texas grid was challenged by February 2021, with a record-breaking freeze hit the South and swept across the state of Texas, as I've said, down to the Rio Grande, plummeting temperatures statewide to below freezing for 5 consecutive days, resulting in power demands that outstripped the capacity of Texas grid to provide adequate electricity. I was out in my district working with ambulances who had to retrieve or to get senior citizens who literally could not move out of their homes into warm hospitals just to save their lives. We know that many lost their life, including an 11-year-old boy who froze in his bed. To keep the grid from failing, rolling blackouts were instituted that resulted in freezing temperatures in homes not constructed to retain heat in Texas. hundreds of Texas lost their lives in the freeze, as I said, with accurate numbers of deaths remaining elusive months after the event, but is estimated by one research study to have been between 700 and 900 lives lost. And so we continue to address this question: Colonial Pipeline, SolarWinds, freeze, the issues that were made clear by the Commissioner of Federal Communications, the Department of Homeland Security. The speakers who have come from different perspectives realize that we must be integrated. There is a mutual need to confront these concerns. We will do them together. I am glad that this innovative panel, hosted by the Congressional Black Caucus in the 50th year of the Congressional Black Caucus, will be important. And so I yield to Mr. Our co-moderator so that we can continue.
Thank you, Congresswoman. So my first question is for Dr. Muskington. As you mentioned last week, President Biden signed the National Security Memorandum aimed at boosting the cyber defenses of our critical infrastructure. The program will be voluntary at first, but administration officials are signaling that they're ready to work with Congress to make them mandatory if necessary. After 20 years of a voluntary approach, do you think time for regulation to make standards mandatory? What are your thoughts?
First, thanks for the question. I think that it's fair to say that, 1998, the PDD 63 is when this current regime started. It's often described as a sort of voluntary approach, best practice-based approach. It's actually a mixed approach, where some sector risk management agencies do have regulatory authorities, Department of Energy in particular, CISA in particular, the regulator of the chemical facilities anti-terrorism standards. So it's a mixed approach where CISA, DHS, and other sector risk management agencies have some authorities to affect the risk calculus of companies. It is true to say that mostly the emphasis is on trust-based interoperability of cybersecurity rules. Best practices, not rules. That's where most of the consensus has been, and depending on one's feelings about risk conditions, that's probably a good strategic approach. When risk conditions get noticeably worse, however, and when they seem to be getting worse fast enough, I think it's fair to say that people are looking at all elements of government authorities and private sector technological and other capabilities and see if we can't do a little bit better, a little bit faster. I'm not sure that any overall decision's been made relative to mandates versus a voluntary spectrum of responses, but moving away from approaches that we've had in the past that demonstrably have not closed the risk gap between the defenders, critical infrastructure owner operators, and the attackers who exploit every vulnerability and risk they can, seems to me like a smart thing to do.
Let me add another regulator that is key to the list that Dr. Muskington referenced, and that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which has been very focused on cyber threats, but also threats against critical infrastructure caused by climate change and severe weather events. And so this work is critically important because it's helping to support and hold up a very necessary industry. Thank you.
I'll just add to that, when you think about regulations in different industries, I really would encourage everyone to think about regulations as really a base level. And I mean, you would see that out of comments straight from FERC or NERC or others. And so while it's an important question in front of us now on how do we address that in different industries, I would encourage everyone to think about really the larger issue, which is how do we raise the tide in these kind of security situations for all industries, really above and beyond just regulatory base level of what we want to do at some of these entities.
That's great. Thank you so very much, Brian. Yielding to the next.
I'm going to take a second bite to say that an entire area we haven't spoken about are the other key economic sectors. So that's a topic for another time, but the financial sector, healthcare, et cetera, that have also been plagued by a growing number of threats and attacks. So I embrace Brian's point wholeheartedly, and there is much more that we can do across the board.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. I listed that as I was speaking. Mr. Aban, do you want to take a minute or a second?
Yes, I guess just like I mentioned before, like since we do work in the DoD, we were mandated to get the CMMC certification. So that meant to do work in the DoD space, you had to have the cybersecurity maturity model certification to do work. So just like Colette mentioned, if you can apply those models across all agencies and everybody else to uplift the cybersecurity requirements that is required to apply, then it means everybody gets the attention that it deserves, whether civilian is health, power, energy, financials. I think then we all move in the same direction. So that will be my last input to that.
Thank you. This is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I want to thank this wonderful audience. Kambiz, you've been a wonderful moderator, and I'd like to yield to you for our closing. Thank you to the audience. Thank you to all of our panelists, if I might, Commissioner Ellis, Mr. Russell, Mr. Abam, Commissioner Stark, Chairman Campos, Brian Barrios, thank you, and the Edison Company for your sponsorship. Thank you, Honorable Colette Honorable, and of course, Mr. Muskington. Kambiz, thank you so very much. Your closing remarks, please.
Thank you, Congresswoman, for inviting me and for organizing this dynamic conversation at the 50th Annual Congressional Black Caucus Foundation Legislative Conference. I also want to thank Secretary Granholm for her inspiring keynote remarks, as well as our distinguished panelists. You know, I think it's important that we not only continue to secure our critical infrastructure for growing cyber attacks, but that we also champion and invest in climate-friendly innovation, such as renewables, smart grids, wind, hydrogen, solar, battery technology, and carbon capture utilization and storage. You know, because climate change aggravates many of the damaging features of our natural environment, as we saw with the deep freeze in Texas back in February. You know, when those gas wells froze in the Permian Basin, that cut off pressure to the gas system, which then cut off the gas to power plants, which then cut off electricity generation for pumping gas through pipelines. So it was this whole vicious feedback cycle. You know, as we see every day, the impacts of the changing climate fall on those who are, you know, most vulnerable and who have done the least to cause the problem. You know, I think it's important that we not only achieve a climate forward economy, but how we get there. Local communities should have a seat at the table. Minority and low income communities that have been disproportionately exposed to environmental harms should be safeguarded. Workers and emission intensive industries need to see a clear path towards a brighter future. But without centering climate justice and equity in these decisions, mitigation efforts could deepen economic inequality and systemic racism and create this new divide between climate haves and have-nots. I think we can do better, and it's through conversations like these with the Congresswoman's Energy Brain Trust that we can get closer to solving many of these problems. Thank you again, Congresswoman, and thank you, ALC.
Wonderful. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful
Thank you.
conference.
Thank you.
you.